If you're curious about major mid-century politicians like Lyndon B. Johnson, and you're interested in a very slow burn biography, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'm looking at The Path to Power by Robert Caro. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at the first book in what is currently a massive 4-book series, and it is expected to be at least a 5-book series. I think the next book will be the last book. Robert Caro is in his 90s or close to it, and this series of books is a culmination of years and years of work. I think he said on this first book that he spent 7 years, and I think every book after that has been a similar amount of time. As a matter of fact, Robert Caro, I think, only has 5 books that he's written, but each of them is huge. The first one that he wrote is about Robert Moses, the power broker. It's a very well-known book for those that are interested in the making of New York City and a lot of the questions of infrastructure and the history of why New York City is the way it is. If you're interested in that, you can obviously go read that book, but also currently the podcast 99% Invisible is doing a year-long look at that book, and I'm actually joining in on that. So at the end of the year, I will also have a review of The Power Broker. The Path to Power, the first in this series about LBJ, came out in 1990, which means that even though LBJ had passed away by the time that Robert Caro had written this book and finished it and been published, he did have an opportunity to talk to lots of people that had been around and did know LBJ growing up. And this first book deals a lot with that. Matter of fact, I would say that's probably the most important contribution of this book in the larger story of Lyndon B. Johnson. I know that you could look at all sorts of questions of the legacy of LBJ when he was president, his time in the Senate, and each of the subsequent books will do that. But the question of what made him the person that he was, what made him interested in getting into politics, his approach to politics, his belief in what politics could accomplish, all of that is going to mostly be found in this book, and the way that he thought about politicians and the way that he gained power. And I will say that that is definitely the most impactful part of this book. Of course, with a book this big, he starts by giving you a relatively detailed history of the not just parents of LBJ, but his grandparents, and even a little bit of discussion of his great-grandparents as he's trying to help you understand Texas and the place in which he grew up in the hill country of Texas, down between San Antonio and Austin. He goes over the issues of trying to have a successful ranching business and any efforts at farming and just the problems that they faced in the hill country and the larger politics of Texas as a whole. His father had served in the Texas legislature, but his father also really struggled, and a lot of that had to do with the ecological impacts of where they were trying to develop a ranch. One thing that you'll note is that LBJ did not have a great relationship with his father, and that seems to be one of the driving forces, not necessarily into him going into politics, but into shaping his personality and some of the decisions that he makes early on in life. And it really helped to shape his attitude just towards leadership, towards power, towards what people do to get ahead in life. And after a bit of a wayward approach to his trajectory in life, and before finally going to college, he finds himself kind of all over the place, a bit of a troublemaker, and not even in the classic trope of a person that's too smart and just is too bored and doesn't know what to do. No, he just seemed to be kind of a petty troublemaker a lot of the times. He did not show any real aptitude or special abilities in his youth, and it wasn't until he went to the lowly teaching college that he studied at, which was barely a college, and which he didn't even do all that well in, but it was there that he, for the first time, got a glimpse of how he could come to power, especially if he was not exactly the most popular person, but what kinds of levers he could pull. And you can see Robert Caro using this as an opportunity to give you a little more about the personality of LBJ, but also set you up to understand the strategies that he will use throughout the rest of his time in politics, clear up through his presidency. So the book will go through LBJ's time at college, his early years as a teacher, which did not last very long, and then what was not just a big break, but it was an opportunity that he really capitalized on when he was invited to be on the team of a congressman. And when he went to DC, he became pretty quickly the most important assistant to this congressman, and he used the opportunity to really ingratiate himself with everyone in Congress that he could. He's going to put a lot of time and energy into making not just good friends with other politicians, particularly elderly statesmen. He knew that that was the way to really build up prestige, is getting to know people, but he also is going to spend a ton of time and a ton of energy in responding to letters from the constituents, because he knows that that is how he is going to build a base of support. And that is exactly what he does. And as a matter of fact, the other two people that he gets to help him in the congressman's office, that's essentially all they're doing, is writing letters all the time, trying to get people the things that they're asking for. And that is something that he tends to be very successful at. He also is then going to get into a little bit of politics himself when he engages with this small Congress, which is essentially just all of the other assistants to congressmen that spend their time together, and they make a group out of it. But there happens to also be some politics involved in that. And so then you're going to see LBJ again using his wiles to figure out a way to put himself at the head of that committee, even though it has no real power, no real authority, but it's just a chance for him to build some prestige for himself. He then is going to get an opportunity to run for Congress, which he does. He's quite young when he is successfully elected to Congress for the first time. And he's going to discover once he's in Congress that he actually cannot quite be as successful as he was hoping the way he had been when he was a person behind the scenes. And a lot of people say that this is where you start to see a real turning point in his approach to getting ahead and his approach to climbing the ladder, because he realizes that if you want to have any kind of special committee appointments, or if you want to have any kind of special projects in Congress, you have to have seniority. And that's just something you can't have overnight. It's literally just waiting it out, and he does not have the patience for that. This is where we start to see him use his connections, his affiliation with FDR. He also is going to use the power of the purse, because he's going to become heavily involved in all of the fundraising and the distribution of money that helps to keep Democrats in office or elect new Democrats in office. Matter of fact, there is one year in which FDR is convinced that he is going to lose big time, but it appears that LBJ is incredibly efficient at the way he distributes money. And not only do they not lose the House, they actually gain some seats in the House. And they do lose a few seats in the Senate, which goes to show that whatever LBJ was doing, it seemed to have a real impact on the race. And this is going to set something up for the way LBJ approaches the rest of his political career. Something that I forgot to mention that is actually the very first thing that happens in the book is Robert Caro details a time when LBJ was first starting out as a congressman, so this is jumping ahead. And at the very beginning of the book, he details this time where he had opportunity to get some resources, but he chooses to turn it down because he felt like it would indebt him to the wrong people. But what's interesting is by the time LBJ becomes president, he does have immense resources, and he is very wealthy. And that's not something that is usually associated with LBJ, because he didn't come from money, and the way that he used his resources and gathered his resources, it didn't exactly seem, I won't just say above board, but it wasn't part of the image that he projected. And that is still the case clear up through the time that he is in Congress. The book ends with his next big attempt to take a step up when he runs for the Senate in Texas, which that's obviously not a very common opportunity. A lot of times senators get elected and they stay in it for 20, 30 years. And so LBJ, again, incredibly young, is going to seek out this opportunity. And that is how this book ends, is with his attempt at getting elected into the Senate. That's, of course, a big part of his career. And I'm assuming the next step is going to be a huge part of the next book in the series, which I'm very much looking forward to reading. So what can I say about this book that isn't just retelling some of the details? I will say this: Robert Caro clearly is not writing a hagiography of LBJ. He is not particularly kind to LBJ. When he's trying to understand the reason why he thinks the way that he does, or the way he approaches politics, it is not a generous interpretation of his motives. It is a pretty negative approach. And I would say that that's something that's definitely going to color your attitude towards this book. So I would recommend it to somebody that is interested in history and has an open mind, especially if you have really good feelings about LBJ, or you think highly of his presidency. I guess you can still think highly of his presidency, but you have to be prepared to understand that this is not going to depict him in the most positive of lights. Also, I would recommend this for people that are interested in very big books, and books that are going to have to be pretty expansive to fill out the hundreds and hundreds of pages that this book covers. He has to give a lot of backstory, and he has to give a lot of context. That being said, the vast majority is about LBJ, so you don't have to spend hundreds and hundreds of pages trying to understand the politics of the Hill Country. That doesn't take up that much space, but it is worth noting that you will have those digressions because it's important for setting the scene, and to cover the amount of material that he does cover requires that some of the space is going to be used in setting that context. Who wouldn't I recommend this for? Well, like I said, people that were looking for hagiography, it's not here. Also, if you can't read this long of a book, then it's not going to be for you. But otherwise, I would recommend this to people that are interested about LBJ, at least his early life. I suspect if you're more interested in his presidency and stuff, you're going to want to look at the later books to get that information. But I will let you know when I read those books, because I very much look forward to seeing what else Robert Caro has to say about LBJ and his career in the Senate and the vice presidency and as the president. I will let you guys know as I find out. Of course, I would like to know what you guys think about this book if you've read it, or if you're interested in reading it, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.